Let's start with something that most cardiology patients are never told directly, and that I think deserves to be said plainly and without exaggeration. The arterial plaques that are narrowing your blood vessels right now are not necessarily permanent. They are not static deposits locked into your arterial wall like concrete in a pipe. They are dynamic, biologically active structures, responsive to the biochemical environment they exist in. And when that environment changes, when the signals of inflammation drop, when LDL particle density decreases, when the oxidative stress that drives plaque growth is reduced, those plaques can stabilize, and in some cases, measurably regress. This is not alternative medicine. This is not fringe science. Coronary plaque regression has been documented in peer-reviewed clinical trials. The reversal trial, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, demonstrated coronary plaque regression in patients on high-intensity statin therapy. The asteroid trial, also published in JAMA, showed that aggressive LDL reduction with rosuvastatin produced measurable regression in plaque volume as assessed by intravascular ultrasound. But here's what those trials didn't tell the public clearly enough. The regression wasn't just about the medication. It was about creating a biological environment in which the plaque could no longer grow, and in which the body's own reverse cholesterol transport machinery could begin to pull lipid back out of the arterial wall. And that environment can be significantly shaped by what you eat, how you move, how well you sleep, and how effectively you manage the inflammation that drives plaque growth in the first place. That's what this video is about. I want to be completely honest with you about the scope of what's possible here, because honesty builds more trust than optimism. Significant, advanced, calcified plaques, hard plaques with extensive calcium deposits, are unlikely to undergo dramatic regression through lifestyle intervention alone. The calcification process stabilizes the plaque, but also makes it more resistant to the reverse transport mechanism. What lifestyle intervention does best is prevent new plaque formation, stabilize vulnerable plaques and reduce their rupture risk, promote regression of soft, lipid-rich, non-calcified plaques, and reduce the overall atherogenic environment that drives cardiovascular disease progression. These are not small outcomes. Plaque rupture, not plaque volume, is the primary cause of heart attack and stroke. A stabilized plaque that doesn't rupture is a plaque that doesn't kill you. This is worth understanding deeply. If this is your first time on this channel, let me tell you what we do here. We take the research seriously, we present it accurately, we distinguish between what is established and what is emerging, and we give you information complete enough to have a genuinely informed conversation with your physician. We're building toward 100,000 subscribers, people who want real clinical depth without the spin. Subscribe if that's what you're looking for. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call James. He was 63 years old, a retired engineer, sharp and methodical. He came in after a coronary calcium scan had returned a calcium score of 412, placing him in the high-risk category. His cardiologist had prescribed a statin and advised him to reduce saturated fat. James took the statin, he reduced saturated fat moderately, and a year later, when he had a follow-up lipid panel, his LDL was lower, but his sense that nothing else was being done, that he wasn't being given a complete picture, brought him to me. When we did a thorough workup, several things emerged. His small, dense LDL particle count, measured by NMR lipoprotein fractionation, was elevated even though his standard LDL number looked acceptable. His high-sensitivity CRP, a marker of systemic vascular inflammation, was 2.8 milligrams per liter, elevated. His fasting insulin was 17 microunits per milliliter, indicating significant insulin resistance. His omega-3 index, a measure of EPA and DHA incorporation into red cell membranes, was 3.2%, well below the optimal range of 8 to 12%. His diet, despite the saturated fat reduction, was still high in refined carbohydrates. None of these had been assessed. None had been addressed. The statin alone was fighting half the battle. When we addressed the full picture, systematically, over 12 months, his high-sensitivity CRP dropped to 0.8. His insulin resistance improved substantially. His omega-3 index rose to 7.4%. A repeat calcium score at 2 years was essentially unchanged, which, in a 63-year-old with a baseline score of 412, represents a meaningful clinical win. Plaque stabilization. Zero progression. No new events. Here's how to understand arterial plaque at the biological level, using an analogy that actually captures the mechanism. Think of your arterial wall as a three-lane highway. The innermost layer, the endothelium, is the lane markings and the guardrail. It's a single cell thick, and it's doing an extraordinary job under normal circumstances, regulating what passes from the bloodstream into the arterial wall, producing nitric oxide to keep the vessel relaxed and open, and preventing the adhesion of inflammatory cells. Now imagine that the guardrail gets damaged. It doesn't take much. Chronically elevated blood sugar causes endothelial glycation. Oxidized LDL particles are directly toxic to endothelial cells. Sustained high blood pressure creates shear stress that literally peels the guardrail apart. Once the endothelium is damaged, the underlying tissue, the intima, is exposed. Small, dense, oxidized LDL particles, which are far more atherogenic than large, buoyant LDL particles, slide through the damaged lining and into the intima. The immune system responds, macrophages migrate into the wall, engulf the oxidized LDL, and become what are called foam cells, lipid-laden macrophages that are the foundational building block of plaque. The plaque grows. It recruits smooth muscle cells. It develops a fibrous cap. It accumulates a lipid-rich necrotic core. And the stability of that plaque, whether it sits quietly in the wall or ruptures catastrophically, depends almost entirely on the ongoing biochemical environment. The degree of ongoing inflammation, the oxidative stress burden, the ratio of matrix metalloproteinase activity to fibrous cap synthesis. Change the environment. Change the fate of the plaque. Step 1. Drive small, dense LDL down and shift the particle profile. Standard LDL cholesterol, measured in most basic lipid panels, gives you an incomplete picture of atherogenic risk. What matters more than total LDL is LDL particle size and number. Small, dense LDL particles are more atherogenic for three specific reasons. They penetrate the endothelium more easily, they are retained in the intima longer, and they are more susceptible to oxidation. Large, buoyant LDL particles are substantially less atherogenic even at the same total LDL concentration. And the dietary factor most powerfully associated with producing small, dense LDL is not saturated fat, it's refined carbohydrates and excess dietary fructose. This is established metabolic science, documented in research from Stanford's metabolism laboratories and replicated across multiple dietary intervention studies. When carbohydrate intake is reduced, particularly refined starches and added sugars, the liver produces fewer, very low-density lipoprotein particles, the precursor to small, dense LDL. Triglycerides fall, HDL rises, and the LDL particle profile shifts from the dangerous small, dense pattern toward the less atherogenic large, buoyant pattern. Practically, minimize refined carbohydrates, white bread, white rice, processed snack foods, sweetened beverages. Prioritize complex carbohydrates with high fiber content. The fiber itself directly binds bile acids in the gut, reducing their reabsorption, forcing the liver to pull LDL from circulation to synthesize replacement bile acids, and lowering LDL particle number as a result. A meta-analysis published in the Annals of Internal Medicine found that soluble fiber supplementation at 10 to 25 grams per day reduced LDL cholesterol by 5 to 10%. This is not trivial. In the context of plaque regression, every meaningful LDL reduction contributes to shifting the arterial wall environment away from continued plaque growth. Drop your age in the comments. Here's why it's clinically relevant for this specific topic. The biology of plaque regression shifts meaningfully across age groups. Under 55, the fibrous cap of most plaques retains enough biological plasticity that lifestyle intervention can produce measurable soft plaque regression, the kind documented in intravascular ultrasound studies. The macrophage-driven reverse cholesterol transport system is relatively active, and when you remove the atherogenic stimulus, oxidized LDL, inflammation, insulin resistance, the system can begin to export lipid back out of the foam cells and into HDL for transport to the liver. After 55, and especially after 65, the balance shifts. Plaque calcification becomes more prevalent. Calcified plaque is more resistant to regression, but is generally more stable and less rupture-prone than soft, lipid-rich plaque. The clinical goal in this age group shifts somewhat, from regression to stabilization and preventing new soft plaque formation. But the interventions are largely the same, and in people of any age, reducing the inflammatory environment and improving the atherogenic lipid profile reduces the risk of the one outcome that matters most: plaque rupture and the heart attack or stroke that follows. So drop your age below and I'll speak to the specifics of your risk window in future videos. Step 2. Extinguish the inflammatory fire. The omega-3 and polyphenol strategy. Inflammation is not a side effect of plaque, it is the engine of plaque. The cytokine environment within a plaque determines whether its fibrous cap thickens, stabilizing it, or whether matrix metalloproteinases degrade the cap, rendering it vulnerable to rupture. And inflammation in the vascular wall is directly responsive to dietary inputs in ways that are mechanistically well understood. Omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA, are incorporated into the phospholipid membranes of macrophages, foam cells, and endothelial cells. As membrane constituents, they compete with arachidonic acid in the eicosanoid synthesis pathway, shifting the balance away from pro-inflammatory prostaglandins and thromboxanes toward pro-resolving mediators, specifically resolvins and protectins, a class of lipid mediators first characterized by Dr. Charles Sirhan at Harvard Medical School. These pro-resolving mediators are not simply anti-inflammatory, they actively promote the resolution of existing inflammation. This is a biologically distinct process, not suppression, but active resolution. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology found that high-dose EPA, specifically eicosapentaenoic acid at 4 grams per day, significantly reduced cardiovascular events in statin-treated patients with elevated triglycerides in the REDUCE-IT trial. The mechanism appears to be at least partly independent of triglyceride lowering, suggesting direct plaque stabilization effects. Food sources: fatty fish 2 to 3 times weekly, sardines, mackerel, wild salmon, herring. Supplementation with pharmaceutical-grade fish oil for those who don't meet dietary targets. The omega-3 index, your red cell EPA and DHA percentage, is a measurable biomarker of status. Target above 8%. Most people are below 5. Polyphenols found in dark berries, extra virgin olive oil, green tea, dark chocolate above 85% cacao activate NRF2, the master transcription factor for antioxidant defense, and directly protect LDL particles from oxidation. Oxidized LDL is the trigger for foam cell formation. Preventing LDL oxidation is a direct upstream intervention on plaque initiation. Extra virgin olive oil deserves special mention. Oleocanthal, a phenolic compound in high-quality olive oil, has been shown in laboratory research to inhibit the same enzyme, COX, that ibuprofen inhibits by a similar mechanism. Anti-inflammatory effects from food. Step 3. Activate reverse cholesterol transport. HDL function matters more than HDL level. Here's the nuance about HDL that most basic lipid discussions miss. HDL, high-density lipoprotein, is not simply a protective molecule because it's high. It is protective because of what it does. It engages in reverse cholesterol transport, pulling cholesterol from peripheral tissues, including arterial plaques, and carrying it back to the liver for excretion. But HDL particles can be dysfunctional. They can be low in their cholesterol-extracting proteins, particularly ABCA1 transporter interactions. They can carry pro-inflammatory cargo rather than anti-inflammatory cargo. And a high HDL number measured on a basic lipid panel tells you almost nothing about whether the HDL you have is functioning properly. The factors that improve HDL function, not just quantity, are aerobic exercise, which consistently and reliably improves HDL particle function and increases reverse cholesterol transport capacity, smoking cessation, which reverses the oxidative damage that HDL particles suffer in smokers, reducing refined carbohydrates and trans fats, and moderate alcohol reduction in people who drink excessively. Of these, aerobic exercise is the most powerful and most consistently supported across the research literature. A study published in Arteriosclerosis, Thrombosis, and Vascular Biology found that exercise training improved HDL efflux capacity, the functional measure of reverse cholesterol transport, independent of changes in HDL cholesterol level. You can improve the function without dramatically changing the number. That functional improvement is what helps pull lipid out of arterial plaques. Step 4. Restore endothelial function. Nitric oxide is the master protector. The endothelium, that single cell lining of your arterial wall, protects against plaque formation primarily through one molecule, nitric oxide. Nitric oxide, produced by endothelial nitric oxide synthase, keeps blood vessels relaxed and dilated, inhibits platelet aggregation, reduces the expression of adhesion molecules that attract inflammatory cells to the vessel wall, and directly inhibits the oxidation of LDL in the subendothelial space. When nitric oxide production falls, due to insulin resistance, oxidative stress, physical inactivity, or endothelial aging, every protective mechanism degrades simultaneously. Restoring nitric oxide bioavailability is therefore a central target in plaque regression strategy. The dietary pathway to nitric oxide that bypasses endothelial synthesis, and which is therefore particularly valuable when the endothelium is already damaged, is the nitrite-nitric oxide pathway. Dietary nitrates from vegetables, particularly beetroot, spinach, arugula, and celery, are reduced by oral bacteria to nitrite, which is then converted to nitric oxide in the bloodstream by a pH-dependent process, particularly in the acidic environment of ischemic tissue. A meta-analysis published in Hypertension found that dietary nitrate supplementation, primarily through beetroot juice, significantly reduced systolic blood pressure and improved endothelial function. This is a Tier 2 finding for plaque regression specifically, emerging evidence, but the mechanism is credible and the food intervention is entirely safe. Step 5. The Free Plaque Protection Protocol. Here is the specific, daily, no-cost practice that addresses the 4 pathways I've described simultaneously. It takes less than 30 minutes and requires nothing beyond a grocery store and a pair of shoes. Morning, a 20 to 30 minute brisk walk. The aerobic exercise stimulus, sustained at 60 to 75% of maximum heart rate, activates endothelial nitric oxide synthase, improves HDL efflux capacity, reduces fasting insulin, and lowers high-sensitivity CRP. This is the single intervention with the broadest beneficial effect across every pathway discussed today. With breakfast, a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil, either on food or alongside it. A handful of mixed nuts, walnuts specifically, provide alpha-linolenic acid and elagitannins. A source of soluble fiber, oats, psyllium, or fruit. With the day's largest meal, fatty fish at least twice per week. A leafy green vegetable, spinach or arugula, which provides dietary nitrates. Berries at some point in the day, the polyphenol load from 1 cup of blueberries, blackberries, or raspberries is clinically meaningful. Supplements to discuss with your physician. Omega-3 fish oil targeting an omega-3 index above 8%. Magnesium glycinate at 300 to 400 milligrams, which improves insulin sensitivity and reduces inflammatory markers. And vitamin K2 at 90 to 180 micrograms of MK7, which directs calcium into bone rather than arterial walls. At night, 7 to 8 hours of sleep. This is not peripheral. A single night of sleep deprivation measurably increases inflammatory markers, reduces insulin sensitivity, and elevates cortisol, every one of which drives atherogenesis. Sleep is when the vascular repair that exercise and nutrition enable actually occurs. The arterial system is not a fixed system. It is a living, dynamic tissue that responds to the biological environment it lives in. Plaque can stabilize. Soft plaque can regress. The atherogenic environment that grows new lesions can be dismantled. None of this happens overnight. None of this replaces appropriate medical management or medication where it's indicated. But all of it is within your reach, starting today, with the information I've given you. Change the environment. The biology follows. Your health is your responsibility, not the pharmacy's. I'll see you in the next video. Let me expand the picture significantly by going deeper into the role of insulin resistance in arterial plaque biology, because this is the missing chapter in most cardiovascular conversations, and it changes what you actually do about plaque at the dietary level. Insulin resistance is not just a metabolic problem. It is a vascular problem. When cells throughout the body become resistant to insulin's signal, several things happen simultaneously in the arterial wall. First, compensatory hyperinsulinemia develops. The pancreas secretes more insulin to overcome the resistance, and circulating insulin levels rise. High insulin is directly pro-atherogenic. It stimulates smooth muscle cell proliferation in the arterial wall, which is a key step in plaque progression. Second, insulin resistance is almost always accompanied by elevated triglycerides and reduced HDL, the dyslipidemic pattern most strongly associated with small dense LDL production and plaque growth. Third, and perhaps most importantly, insulin resistance promotes endothelial dysfunction by reducing endothelial nitric oxide synthase activity and increasing the expression of adhesion molecules on the endothelial surface. Plaque essentially cannot form on a healthy, insulin-sensitive, nitric oxide-producing endothelium. It can only gain its foothold on an endothelium that has been compromised. Insulin resistance is one of the most powerful compromisers of endothelial health that we know of, and it is present, subclinically, in an enormous proportion of adults over 40 who do not yet have a formal diabetes diagnosis. The fasting insulin test, not routinely included in most standard metabolic panels, is the most direct window into this. A fasting insulin above 10 microunits per milliliter signals meaningful insulin resistance even if fasting glucose is still within the normal range. If you have never had your fasting insulin measured, it is worth asking for, because the intervention that lowers insulin resistance most powerfully, dietary carbohydrate reduction combined with sustained aerobic exercise, is also the intervention that most directly dismantles the atherogenic environment driving plaque growth. The mechanism connects dietary choice to arterial wall biology through insulin, and once you see that connection, the nutritional recommendations I've described stop feeling like generic lifestyle advice and start feeling like targeted pharmacology. Let me also address the specific role of stress, both psychological and physiological, in plaque biology, because it belongs in this conversation and it rarely gets adequate clinical attention. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's primary stress response system, when chronically activated, produces sustained elevations in cortisol and catecholamines. Cortisol directly promotes insulin resistance by upregulating hepatic glucose production and reducing peripheral insulin sensitivity. It promotes visceral adiposity, and visceral fat is itself an endocrine organ that secretes pro-inflammatory cytokines, including interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, directly into the portal circulation, driving systemic inflammation. Catecholamines, adrenaline and noradrenaline, increase heart rate and blood pressure, increasing the endothelial shear stress that damages the vascular lining. Chronic psychological stress is independently associated with accelerated atherosclerosis progression in well-designed prospective studies, including research from the University College London that tracked carotid intima media thickness in relation to work stress and found measurable acceleration of plaque progression in high-stress occupational groups after controlling for traditional risk factors. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, the structured 8-week program developed by John Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts, has been shown in randomized trials to significantly reduce cortisol, reduce high-sensitivity CRP, and reduce blood pressure. These are not soft outcomes. These are the same biomarkers that drive plaque progression. Managing stress is not a lifestyle nicety for people with cardiovascular disease. It is a direct biological intervention on the mechanisms of arterial disease. Build it into the protocol alongside the walk, the olive oil, and the omega-3s. The vascular system does not distinguish between a threat and a perceived threat. Both activate the same cascade. Calm the cascade. Change the biology. Finally, let me round this out with the hydration dimension, because it connects to blood viscosity in ways that are directly relevant to plaque rupture risk. Adequate hydration reduces blood viscosity, the thickness and stickiness of blood as it flows through vessels. Dehydrated blood is more viscous, more prone to platelet aggregation, and more likely to form thrombi, blood clots, at the site of a ruptured plaque. The heart attack that results from plaque rupture is not caused by the rupture alone. It's caused by the thrombus that forms at the rupture site, which occludes the vessel. Anything that reduces platelet aggregation and thrombus formation reduces the conversion of a plaque rupture into a full coronary event. Hydration is the simplest possible intervention on blood viscosity. 8 to 10 glasses of water per day, more in heat or during exercise. It is not a substitute for any of the other interventions I've described, but in the context of a comprehensive plaque regression strategy, it is one more environmental input that moves the biology in the right direction. Every input matters. The arterial wall is listening to all of them, simultaneously, all the time. Give it the right signals, consistently, over years. The science says it responds. Your health is your responsibility, not the pharmacy's. I'll see you in the next video.